Now, hello everyone. Welcome back to our other session of the Underdogs, the other book reading session. Welcome all of you to the session and welcome everybody. And how are you, Chris? How have you been?
Doing rather well. This has been the really busy time of year for me, but just this last weekend, I did the last major event on my to-do list for a fair while, and now I get to just collapse in the heat and do as little as possible.
Oh, please take care of yourself.
Really.
Right. Which chapter shall we begin with today?
I believe we're on chapter 9 now. I think
Yeah,
that the last chapter was Ewan walking with Jack and Gracie.
absolutely. So let's
Okay.
begin. Okay.
Okay. If you need a bit of a recap
Yeah,
on what happened last time,
that would be
you have
great.
5 seconds to stop watching if you don't want spoilers. 4, 3, 2, 1. Raj died. I'm really sorry.
Oh,
And see you. Went out in an act of sacrifice that basically made sure that no one would discover where Spitfire's Rise is. And yeah,
yeah.
it was gory, but it was you don't really necessarily get to choose which way you go out in a war, but at least Raj got that chance. Meanwhile, Kate is reacting to that about as well as you would expect, given that her boyfriend literally just blew up in front of her, and she's evacuating with Mark and Simon. Ewan is stressed out himself, of course, and pretty much incapable of leading, and has spent the whole time just ranting at Jack and Gracie, who eventually decided, you know what, Ewan, find your own way home. We will walk off somewhere. We'll meet you at the house in Lemsford, where we met up at the uh, in the opening act of Underdogs 1. But yeah, we'll find your own way, and you'll get there a lot calmer and clearer just by going by yourself. So, chapter 9. This is a Kate chapter. Kate twitched in fright as Mark's brick smashed her geography teacher's car window. To their left, Simon shook his head frantically. You're making me do this, Mark growled as he opened the door from the inside. You're both slow as hell, and the clones are coming. Either I break the no cars rule, or I leave you both behind. You had no problem leaving my brother behind, Kate thought. Get bloody running, they're not worth it, you said. You had no idea how much James was worth. One day, when I'm my better self, I'll confront you about it. Not today, but one day, Mark. They had stumbled for about 100 metres before Mark had realised the hopelessness of escaping on foot. Before Kate knew what was going on, he had ordered them back to Oakenfold, where he had picked out Stuart Lincoln's car, the one which just happened to be the newest in the car park and perhaps the most reliable. Mark reached somewhere behind the steering wheel. A crunch sounded, and a couple of wires appeared. Kate didn't understand what happened next, nor how Mark knew the science of hot wiring a car, but it didn't surprise her. A few moments later, she heard the rev of a car engine for the first time in a year. You getting in? Kate started to move. Simon, rather tellingly, headed straight for the back seats as if he weren't allowed to sit in the front. Once Kate was in the passenger seat and the door half closed, Mark pulled away. Her door flung open again and bashed against the first car they passed, and the resulting bang sent some much-needed adrenaline through Kate's veins. She closed the door properly on the second attempt and glanced through the window as something moved in the early morning light. There were clones. Angry clones. And they were running. Mark! She shouted, her first and only word since her boyfriend had blown himself to pieces. Heads down! He yelled back as the car accelerated. Kate obeyed and squeezed her eyes shut too. It would not shield her from bullets, but would help with the sensory overload that would surely come. Mark must have ducked his own head as the car's path became wonkier and more chaotic. A short spray of bullets attacked the car, hitting nothing but its metal back. Mercifully, the tyres were unaffected. Simon did not follow Mark's command, showing unexpected independence by sticking his head out of the window and firing back at the distant clones. Kate did not look back to see whether he hit any. Mark turned a corner, and the clones' gunfire fell into silence, but it did nothing to help Kate calm down. The engine was still roaring, the floor still shook beneath her, and Raj was still dead. 2 more corners later, she opened her eyes, if only to keep an eye out for more hunters. The urban drive felt like a ride on a post-apocalyptic ghost train. Some buildings were burnt-out shells. Some shops had been looted by bands of survivors following takeover day. The blood on the tarmac had long faded, but the occasional skeleton in faded clothes still occupied a space on the pavement. The meat had long been picked clean from their bones. Perhaps the crows above Harpenden had developed a taste for human flesh. That's one of those sentences you never expect to read or write in a novel. Perhaps the crows above Harpenden, which is this town in Hertfordshire, had developed a taste for human flesh. Well, fair enough. Let's keep going. That's what lies in wait for Raj, she thought. My house was down the M1, Mark shouted. I used to take this route every day to Oakenfold. You barely came to Oakenfold, she thought. You vanished for a year after you got sentenced, and after that you only turned up when you felt like it. Of course, if we hit the takeover day traffic jams on the M1, we'll be waiting a bloody long time for the traffic to clear, but it's better than getting shot to death here. Kate felt something warm on the back of her neck. Simon was panting behind her, the whole of his body frozen except his lungs, which took rapid, erratic breaths. His panic and Kate's overload left Mark as the only truly active member of the team. When they arrived at Britain's oldest motorway, the birthplace of their country's worst traffic jams, they discovered the M1 had ended its life with the worst blockage of all. Vehicles were strewn across the road as if a toddler had thrown their toy cars across a fabric floor map, forming a metal hedge maze of vans and people carriers and articulated lorries. Regardless, Mark found a way to manoeuvre through the vehicles whose owners had tried in vain to escape the clones almost a year ago. Kate's seat rocked beneath her whenever she moved onto the grass, and her fingers twitched in discomfort each time her door scraped along a neighbouring car. They must have travelled nearly a mile before the explosion. Every window in their car, and the car surrounding them, shattered with piercing shrieks. The rusted Astra 3 cars ahead flew out from the flames, knocked aside like a golf ball from its tee by the raging fireball at its side. The ground trembled so much that Kate was sure their own wheels left the tarmac. She watched the Astra smack the line of trees at the side of the motorway. It had landed behind their car, suggesting the explosion had happened in front of them. The smoke mirage faded from the crater ahead, and she saw what had fired the shell. It was half a mile beyond the overhead bridge in front of them, crunching its way over the dead vehicles in its path. Bloody hell, yelled Mark. That's an actual bloody tank. It's a Challenger 2, Kate thought. Jordan was in my English class and did tanks for a speaking and listening presentation. It had been the only presentation delivered with any enthusiasm, so it was the only one that stuck in Kate's memory. She mainly remembered the worst parts, that it could kill from up to 5 miles away, and that the only thing ever to destroy a Challenger 2 had been friendly fire from another Challenger 2. Which was true at the time when this came out in 2020, but at some point last year, a Challenger 2 got destroyed in Ukraine. That sucks, but alternate universe. In fact, one distracted.
Okay, so Steph has a question.
Rest in pieces. Yep. Also, why didn't he just shoot himself in the head? Wouldn't that be a less painful, more dignified way to go? I think Raj was banking on the fact that there was like a 1 in a billion chance that the shield might not blow him up. So, yeah, it was. Whereas the gunshot to the head would be mostly sure to kill him, but even if it didn't, it would leave him in a state where he wouldn't want to be alive and might, worst case scenario, be forced to give out information. Whereas if he was kind of hoping against hope that he'd jump through the shield and everything would just happen to be fine. Okay. How the hell did Marshall get his hands on one of them? Asked Mark. I don't think anyone tried to stop him, she whispered. Mark seemed to not hear her answer, or more likely did not care, as he found a way around the crater and continued their path along the M1, straight towards the tank. Simon made a yelling noise in the back seat. Yes, we're going towards it, Mark muttered. If we retreat, it'll get us for sure, or chase us back to Harpenden. If we go towards it, there might be a 1% chance we'll get inside its range. Kate didn't mind the odds being against her survival. Not at that moment. Her intellect told her that she could still contribute to this war, but the rest of her brain told her she had nothing left to offer. And yes, Mark muttered, I know about its secondary weapon, but I'll take my chances with a chain gun over those shells. Ahead, the tank surged over another row of cars. Kate watched as the first car, a large black people carrier, crumbled and flattened in submission. Her parents' lawnmower had never cut grass as effectively as the Challenger 2 mowed its way over a carriageway of vehicles. The tank fired a second shot, which smashed into the brow of the bridge above before it could reach its intended target. Half a ton of concrete left the bridge, flew through the sky and tumbled its way into the nearest caravan, which exploded over all 4 lanes like a wooden metal supernova. The remainder of the damaged bridge collapsed into the road, leaving just one gap underneath the parts blown away by the tank. Mark bit his lip as he found his way through the dust, squeezing through a gap between two cars, a gamble which cost them both wing mirrors. There was an even tighter gap 10 metres ahead, between a painter's van and a petroleum tanker. The gap between them and the Challenger was closing. Kate gasped as she finally realised the flaw in Mark's plan. That even if they got close enough to escape its long-range weaponry, and even if the chain gun operator were a useless shot, the tank could just crush them underneath its tracks. In fact, the clonesmen inside might find the experience more satisfying. The third blast roared from the barrel, but the humans' lives were saved by bad timing. The tank reached the end of the set of cars underneath it and dipped forwards. The barrel sank by about 10 degrees, sending the third shell several hundred meters too short. If they'd fired correctly, we'd be dead. A shell anywhere close to the tanker would have done the job. Okay, their sight is blocked by the dust cloud, Mark said. Get out. Simon obeyed as expected. Kate wanted to follow, but her body wouldn't let her. Mark leapt out of the driver's seat and took the time to stare back into the car before closing the door. Kate, he said, I'm sorry Raj is dead. He was a nice lad. And I wish we had time for you to go through your I'm so sad my life is over phase. But we don't. The tank is coming now, so I've got this plan and I really hope you can pull yourself together quick enough to be part of it. Pull yourself together. That's what the teachers back in mainstream used to say. Mental health issues don't just pull themselves together, Mark, you bloody numpty. You don't stop grieving by pulling yourself together. Even now, I don't know how people do it. She felt angry, an emotion she had not had the energy for all night. It squeezed herself between her fatigue and her misery and motivated her to move herself. She huffed as loudly as she could manage and opened the passenger door. For a split second, a small but important realization entered her brain. One of her therapists once talked about humans' fight or flight instinct, that when a situation got too much for them, a person would either face it head on or get the hell out of there. Last time someone had told Kate to pull herself together, she had not left her bed all day. It had been better to waste a whole day than approach something that scared her, especially for the sake of a person who didn't know how anxiety worked. That morning, on an abandoned M1 in the midst of her grief, she was taking action just by getting out of the car. The war against Nicholas Grant had changed her instincts. A year ago, she chose flight every time without fail. Nowadays, she could fight, even after losing someone she cared about. Kate stepped out of the car into the morning light and followed Simon to the grass bank. Mark stayed at the car for a few moments, busying himself with the petrol cap. She followed Simon until they reached the other side of the bank. Now on foot, they could get some proper shelter. Even the best aim from the tank wouldn't kill them if they hid behind a small hill. Next to the car, Mark had removed his shirt. He produced his bottle of whiskey somewhere, that same whiskey that had spent a year in his Oakenfold locker awaiting his return, doused the lower half of his shirt with it, and stuffed the dry half into the petrol tank. Kate had expected Mark to reach for his lighter without incident, but he leapt suddenly at the sound of a horrifying patat, 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 followed by what looked like miniature fireless explosions spreading across the cars around him. The muzzle flash behind the dust cloud revealed that the Challenger's chain gun was firing blindly, and its huge bullets were ripping apart the abandoned cars. Mark, crouched low for all the good it would do against chain gun bullets, tore the pocket fabric out of his trousers, brought out his lighter, and turned the bottle of whiskey into a Molotov cocktail, which he hurled straight at the tank. The tank got through the dust cloud not 1 moment before its sight was lost again, as the bottle struck not far from its visor and spread flames and smoke across their field of vision. Mark used the distraction to run from the car, out of the way of the random path of chain gun bullets, and arrived behind the peak of the grass bank alongside Kate and Simon. He even found the time to put his hoodie back on along the way. Kate focused her eyes on the petrol tank, as if trying to force the flames to do their work by willpower alone. An exploding car won't be enough to destroy a Challenger 2, even if it goes off right next to... The vehicle blew itself apart, spreading its burning shrapnel across the M1 and flames over its injured chassis. The tank, still 50 meters away, was unaffected. A white cloud burst from the visor as one of the crew took care of the whiskey fire with an extinguisher. Do we run? She managed to whisper. Mark shook his head. The tank headed straight for the burning car, perhaps looking for their victims' burned remains. Their colleagues across Hertfordshire would want to know when to stop hunting survivors. When 10 meters remained between the tank and the burning vehicle, Mark leapt to his feet. You numpties cost me my whiskey. It had been so long since they had used their firearms that Kate had forgotten about the assault rifle hanging around Mark's shoulder. He pointed it straight towards the tanker behind the car and emptied the rest of his magazine into its side. A dozen leaks sprung from the side of the tanker, and Kate buried her face into the grass as the flurry of petrol spilled onto the carriageway and spread towards the flames. Unlike the car explosion, miniature by comparison, The shockwave of the exploding tanker blew all three of their bodies down the side of the bank. Mark later said that her sensory overload had lasted several minutes. All Kate remembered was coming to her senses as if waking up from some kind of empty hallucination and staggering to the top of the bank. Once she was lucid again, she noticed that the tank lay motionless, in flames but undamaged. "It's not destroyed," she mumbled. "We didn't need to kill the tank," answered Mark. "Just the clones inside. They either burned to death or lost all their oxygen. Don't know which, don't care either. Now let's run home." Kate followed as instructed, too tired and deep in grief to appreciate the brilliance of Mark's achievement. Maybe someday she would care that an 18-year-old youth offender who had become the second person ever to destroy Challenger 2, but it will not be that day. And most likely, not for as long as she mourned Raj. End of chapter
Oh,
9.
emotional this time. Like I was just going through it, and the amount of times I've heard to pull myself together. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
lost people, and the amount of times I've heard it, especially when I'm grieving,
Mm.
honestly, it pisses me off. But
Yeah.
of course, yeah, I'm glad that you highlighted that, like
Mm.
highlighted the part of grief. It's very important.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of sad that Mark comes from a world where pull yourself together is the standard advice. And he's helped it to work for him, but probably at the expense of far more compassionate and healthier coping strategies. I mean, pulling
Yeah,
yourself together works at an expense, much the same as autistic masking technically
exactly,
works at huge
exactly,
expense.
absolutely. That makes complete sense.
Hmm.
So let's we shall
Okay.
move on to chapter 10. Does anybody have any
Yes.
questions, or shall we move
Hmm.
on? Let's get into the questions at the end. Let's move on to chapter 10.
Okay. Well, thank you for the wow, Steph. Yeah, I think that chapter there is probably the biggest like blockbuster action scene. There's loads of fight scenes, but there's only one tank on the M1, an exploding oil tanker. So I like that one. Honestly, though, I prefer this chapter. This is possibly my favorite chapter of the book. Maybe
Okay,
there's a contender towards the end for a completely different reason, but without going into any other details, I'll say that this is perhaps my favorite chapter of the book. Certainly my favorite of the first half. Chapter
perfect.
10. As he passed the welcome sign into Lemford, Jack checked his watch. 4 in the afternoon. Their strike on Oakenfold had started 13 hours ago, and he had barely stopped moving since. Gracie, to her credit, was only 5 steps behind. She had slowed on their approach to the village, but despite her worries about this place she had never been to, she had kept up. "Where now?" she whispered. "The Hunter's house, 18 School Lane. Follow me." "You remember the way?" "I was here less than a month ago. And I have the memory thing. Now come on." Jack was grateful that Gracie didn't offer a response. In the old days, any discussion about his Asperger's traits, which has been adapted in the reprints as autism traits, but positive or negative, usually resulted in the other person giving some kind of belittling response, such as, "You don't look autistic," or, "Oh, I'm so sorry." At that moment, the predictable response would have been, "Oh, but I can remember directions too. That's not an autism thing." They would never be able to see what the memory of the house looked like inside Jack's head, the well-mapped, in-depth and painfully specific details of each minor event. Kate's conversation with McCormick to tell them they had arrived, Alex taking little Matthew's room and sleeping under dinosaur bed sheets. Everything related to dinosaurs stuck in Jack's head like the intro to the final countdown, while most people wouldn't even have remembered that the little boy was called Matthew. That joke he had made about Dawn Hunter asking if she was some kind of vampire assassin, and nobody getting it. Charlie saying the last time he kissed a woman, he still called her mummy, and everyone laughing. Those are all very specific details about chapter 5, I think, in book 1, that obviously stick in Jack's head, and this is absolutely a reflection of how my memory worked at his age. It wasn't the joy or the pain that made the night memorable. Jack Hopper simply didn't get a choice in what he remembered. Once a memory was in his brain, it stayed there like a fly stuck to insect paper, never to leave. Sometimes it meant memorizing 58 species of sauropod at the age of 6. Sometimes it meant remembering number plates of random cars on long journeys, whether he wanted to or not. And yes, that's also me. To Gracie at that moment, it just meant knowing his way around a village. Jack found his way to School Lane, and the Hunter's house was there as promised. A little part of Jack had expected the house to look welcoming, perhaps for the grass to look more colourful than he remembered, or for the windows to look cleaner. But nothing special awaited them. The two-storey building looked as dulled and silent as before, indifferent to the return of an old visitor. Jack walked up the garden path and pushed the front door open, holding his breath to avoid choking on the dust. Dust. Unless Ewan had used a different entrance, he had not arrived yet. 80% of dust is human skin. Maybe some of this is ours. Maybe a part of Charlie still exists here. You okay, Jack? Gracie whispered. Apparently he hadn't hidden his memory as he hadn't hidden his misery. See, this is why I didn't do the audiobook. Apparently he hadn't hidden his misery as well as he had thought. Charlie spent his last night on Earth here, he answered. I thought he made it to New London, she asked, and died 3 days later. I don't count that as Earth. Jack made his way to the living room, and his eyes met the spot on the floor that had been his bed 3 weeks earlier. He wondered what Ewan's reaction would be once he arrived, whether his own memories would be as specific, and his emotions just as provoked. It took Jack a moment to remember that he was supposed to check the house for clones, rather than taking a trip down crap memory lane. Can I ask you a question? Asked Gracie. You just did. She sighed behind him. Why do you always do things like that? Is that your real question, or another supplementary one? Gracie's next sigh was more of a snarl. Jack closed his eyes, realising that it wasn't the best time for his brand of humour. Sorry, he said. Go ahead. Did you know Charlie well? Asked Gracie. I did towards the end. Was he nice? Jack sighed. 11 months had passed between Takeover Day and Charlie Coleman's death, and even after spending so much time in such cramped conditions, there were still people in Spitfire's eyes he hadn't got to know. He was Charlie, I guess. But was he nice? He was endearing. I don't think nice was the best word to describe him, but he had his good sides, even if he had to look for them. Gracie sat down on the faded sofa, her face indecipherable. I didn't speak to him. Not once. He was a decent guy, said Jack. It's a shame you two didn't get to know each other. Gracie shrugged and gave a response in a low, subdued tone. I don't think either of us missed out on much. Jack wasn't prepared for that kind of answer. He took a deep breath and then coughed out a mouthful of dust. Gracie was sad about herself, and Jack wasn't sure why. He was an expert at being kind and caring, but knew nothing about how to show kindness and care. Sometimes when people were sad, they wanted to talk about it, and sometimes they wanted to be left alone. And whichever Jack gambled on, he always seemed to get it wrong. It was a heartbreaking position to be in, wanting so deeply to help people in need, but constantly being scorned for trying and failing. Jack could follow any instruction manual to perfection, but people are more difficult than machines. In the end, he put a hand on Gracie's shoulder and gave what he thought was a sympathetic smile. It seemed like the action least likely to be offensive. I'm going to check upstairs and keep watch on the street, he said. Ewan shouldn't be far away. Stay down here and have a rest if you like. You deserve it. Gracie said nothing, and Jack couldn't tell whether his response had been the right one. But either way, the house needed guarding, and he had to admit he was anxious about why Ewan hadn't reached the house first. 5 o'clock came and went, and Ewan was nowhere to be seen. 5:30 came and went, and daylight began to fade. 6 o'clock came, and Jack made a phone call to comms to check if they had heard anything. I just realised this takes place in June, a few days before... No, May. I'm wondering whether the daylight actually does start to fade about 5:30 in May, and I don't think it does. But, well, small continuity error. But I digress. 6 o'clock came, and Jack made a phone call to comms to check if they had heard anything. The call did nothing but make Shannon scared. Even Alex's voice seemed to lose its cool. By 6:30, Jack's nerves had turned to clear and simple panic. Ewan remembered the way, didn't he? He just needs to find a familiar road and take the same route as before. Was he in a fit state to agree when I told him the plan? Is he deliberately taking his time? Does he need the call-off period that badly? There was a creak at the top of the stairs behind him. Jack didn't worry. The footstep was so loud that it couldn't have been made by someone sneaking up on him. He turned around and saw Gracie, her hands trembling and eyes pointed at the carpet. Jack? You okay, Gracie? At first she gave no answer, but just before Jack turned his head back to guard the approach to the house again, she spluttered her words out. Did I kill Raj? Jack stared back in confusion. What? Did Ewan mean it? Is it my fault he died? Jack gave a long sigh. Ewan was angry because he'd just lost a friend. He was saying it out of hurt, nothing more. But he's right. If I'd brought Raj out with me, we'd all be alive. You're assuming you could have made Raj give up and run. He was a stubborn guy. But I could have. Gracie started to sniff, and Jack gritted his teeth. Situations like these were beyond his social understanding, according to the many people who had made him feel bad over the years. And from a logical perspective, it was difficult to argue with her. If Gracie had been more forceful, maybe it really would have saved Raj's life. But maybe it wouldn't have. It would be so easy pretending to know what he'd have done in the same situation. But Gracie had been the one inside Oakenfold, not him. And he had spent many years enduring those who had judged him without knowing his background. So he would never judge others the same way. Gracie would spend the rest of her days wondering about the what ifs, being judged by the people who definitely would have done this or that in her position. Jack refused to become one of them. You did what you needed to, Gracie, he finished. If you'd stayed, you could have both got trapped. Before he could turn to face the street again, Gracie was hugging him. He did not know whether it was a friendship hug or a romantic hug, whatever the latter was, but it lasted longer than most of the hugs he endured. Back at Spitfire's Rise, his friends had spent months joking about the possibility of him and Gracie getting together. The joke had been made so many times that he had wondered whether it was a joke at all. Unfortunately for the crowd, Jack wasn't attracted to Gracie. He was just the only person her age who made time for her, the one who never called her lazy Gracie, or underestimated her because of her habit of blending in with the crowd. Then again, that probably mattered to her. The hug continued, as if she was after something that Jack could not give, and did not even know how to give. Not only did he have zero experience in the field of romance, he had no motivation either. Jack Hopper felt no attraction to girls. He felt no attraction to boys either. He didn't feel it for anything. There was probably a word for it somewhere, but he had been too afraid to check. Life as a teenage boy without physical attraction was difficult, especially in a world where he was expected to go after the ladies, as if it were his civic duty as a male. His lack of sexuality had been one of the many factors that had led to him heading to his room with a bottle of pills on 2 different nights. Just one more thorn in his side, alongside his dead mother and years of relentless bullying. Gracie squeezed, and Jack squeezed back. It seemed polite. But inside, he was struggling with the morals of the situation. Was it okay to let Gracie think there was a chance at all? Would it be better to tell her the truth? Which option would hurt her less in the long run? He may not have felt any attraction to Gracie, but he cared about her, and he didn't want her to get hurt by something beyond her control. A third option appeared in his mind, and he used it without thinking. Are you hungry? He asked. Came a voice from the face buried in his combat uniform. It's getting dark soon. I can get some food for us, if you don't mind guarding for me. Gracie nodded, and Jack escaped the hug. He took his first steps towards the staircase, but felt the need to do something nice before he left. If it makes it easier, you can borrow my rifle while you're up here. 2 automatic weapons are better than 1. What about you? I've got a loaded handgun, he said, surrendering his assault rifle. I'm fine. See you in a bit. Going by Gracie's reaction, he had not done badly. He double-checked his pocket for the handgun before creeping downstairs, and his thoughts drifted to a frightening question. How long could they afford to stay in Lemsford before heading home without Ewan? There was a thump somewhere on the ground floor. Jack froze, but smiled. Perhaps Ewan had been his usual stealthy self and arrived without them noticing. Well, we spent a whole minute hugging with our eyes away from the window. A parade of clowns could have wandered through the front door as long as they weren't being too noisy. All the same, it was better to be careful. The thump could have been nothing, like the half a dozen thumps at Spitfire's Rise each night. Or it could have been something. Jack reached the foot of the stairs, which joined on to the living room. He crept across to the doorway to the hall and poked his head around. After a long, tense silence, Jack was relieved when he saw a familiar figure walk out from the kitchen. After almost a year of living under the same roof, he recognised his companion immediately. But what the hell is Alex doing here? The clear and obvious figure of Alex Ginelli, tall, black and muscular, edged into the hallway with slow, calculating steps. And yes, you are supposed to be confused by this. He peered around with hawk eyes and a bad-tempered expression, his submachine gun held in a way that did not suggest self-defense. Jack didn't know the correct response, but he knew it had to be an instant one. Alex was a friend, but something was wrong. Something seemed wrong with him, even without the obvious question of why he had abandoned his post at comms. Unwilling to raise his weapon and uncomfortable at breaking his silence, Jack withdrew his head from the corridor and looked for a place to shelter. He slipped towards the back wall of the living room to duck behind the television. It seemed like a decent place to keep an eye on things. Alex stepped into the living room and took a look around. He seemed focused on learning where the entrances and exits were. It didn't seem right. Alex knew this house just as well as Jack. He had been here that same night and slept upstairs in little Matthew's bed. Then a second Alex Ginelli followed him into the room. What the ever-loving crap in a handbasket. The two Alexes walked into the most well-lit part of the living room, and Jack noticed the navy blue shade on their uniform. The obvious question entered Jack's mind, but there was no time to think about how the hell Alex had been cloned. A third Alex entered the living room, a third submachine gun in his hands. Jack, sheltered in the dark with his feet tangled in the snake pit of television wires, would not jump up and shoot. He'd given his assault rifle to Gracie out of social awkwardness, and his handgun was semi-automatic, 1 bullet per trigger pull. One moment of hesitation or one bad shot, and 3 submachine guns would answer back. He would have to wait until they turned their backs on him. The first Alex cast his gaze up the stairs. No. Just assume there's nobody up there. Nobody has to die for this. Alex 1, as Jack had subconsciously named him, took his first step onto the staircase. Alex 2 started to follow. Gracie would have her gaze pointed out of the front window and assume any noise to be Jack, who couldn't afford to call out and draw the clone's attention. Hey, came Gracie's voice from upstairs, loud and joyful. I think that's Ewan heading up the road. All 3 Alexes leapt in surprise, with the same shocked expression that the real Alex wore whenever Thomas jump-scared him for fun. The shock faded a moment later, and all 3 faces turned angry. Their war modes had been activated. Alex 1 accelerated up the stairs. Gracie, you numpty! The whisper was loud enough. Alex 2 turned to investigate the darkness. When he found nothing visible, he opened fire indiscriminately, his bullets riddling the walls, the mounted lights, the DVD rack, and the television. Jack ignored the strobe light of the muzzle flash, flung himself to the carpet, and fired all 8 of his handgun bullets. 2 of them flew towards the staircase and pierced Alex 1 in the shoulder blade and kidney. One of the others hit Alex 3 in the chest and sent him dead to the floor. The rest struck nothing but the painting next to Alex 2. Alex 1 toppled to the staircase, alive but in tremendous pain. But even then, there was fury in his twisted facial expression rather than fear. Gracie's voice sounded from upstairs, asking Jack if he was okay. Alex 2 looked at his colleagues in surprise, giving Jack enough time to cast his empty handgun to one side, leap to his feet, and reach for his hunting knife. He threw it towards Alex 2, but it missed pathetically, bounced off the wall, and drew the clone's attention to where he stood. In desperation, he grabbed a glass pot of boiled sweets on the mantelpiece. He charged across the room, his enemy too angered and confused to aim with any accuracy, and raised the glass pot over his head. He brought it crashing into Alex 2's face, where it shattered upon impact. Jack did not feel the sting, nor the warm trickle of his blood as it spilled from his hand. The clone before him was in agony, his eyes closed and his hands picking glass shards from his cheeks. Jack grabbed the clone's submachine gun in one hand and used the other to deliver his strongest punch to his enemy's nose. Jack realized the hopelessness of his situation. The real Alex Janelli was twice as strong as Jack Hopper, and the clone versions were no different. They may not have been grown with Alex's taekwondo skills, but they shared his muscular form. That, and Jack had never seen that kind of ferocity in Alex's eyes. Before Alex 2 could steady himself, Jack's best idea was a headbutt to the face, his helmet cracking into the clone's forehead, and then throwing the weight of his whole body against the clone until it slammed against the wall. To his right, the wounded Alex 1 battered his hand around the stairs in search of his dropped submachine gun. Gracie, bloody help me! Jack wrapped one arm around Alex 2's neck, ignoring the punches to every part of him the clone could reach, and tried to seize his weapon with desperate fingers. The angry clone wrestled back with both hands, a struggle Jack would definitely lose. Jack checked for a clear run to his left, forced all of his strength into the arm wrapped around his enemy's throat, and charged towards the window. Alex 2's forehead shattered the glass and formed several jagged edges that scoured the face that followed. There were no screams from the clone's missing vocal cords, but his mouth opened wide and the rest of his body twitched in pain. Before his adrenaline peaked, Jack used his newfound strength to hold the injured clone in place. Alex 2 fought with all his power to bring his head back into the living room, but could not stop Jack from squeezing his fingers into his collar and carving his neck back and forth against the broken glass. The wall behind the window painted itself red. Really sorry. And the clone's resistance grew weak. Jack turned just in time to see Alex 1's submachine gun pointed in his direction before his last enemy was shot dead by a flurry of bullets from Gracie above. Are you all right? She asked from the top of the stairs. Yeah, said Jack as Alex 1 toppled down the staircase. Peachy, thanks. Peachy is British slang for, yep, doing fine, and I don't know where that word comes from. Jack double-checked each of the 3 bodies in turn to make sure they were dead, and found that against the odds, he and Gracie really had won. And I thought sharing a house with one Alex was difficult, he muttered, as he tended to the cuts in his forehead. Headbutting a clone with glass wounds to his face had not been his brightest idea. What do we do now? Asked Gracie. We call comms, describe everything we've seen, and tell the real Alex he's no longer special and unique. And after that, we get out of here. Hundreds of thousands of houses between Oakenfold and New London, and this is where they searched. Just our luck, said Gracie. It's never luck, came a voice at the front door. Gracie's announcement had been right, but you forgot about that. After 2.5 hours of waiting, Ewan had finally found his way to Lemsford. You've got a theory? Jack asked him. You're the logical one, Ewan answered, looking across the bodies on the floor. 3 clones found their way to this particular house, and all 3 of them were modelled on someone who's been there before. What's the most likely explanation? That they share some of Alex's memories? Ewan's eyes stared piercingly into Jack's. He stared piercingly into Jack's, filled with anger. So where else do they know the way to? End of chapter 10.
All right, that was a roller coaster ride. A lot of things going on.
I'm exhausted reading that now.
Yeah. No, but a lot of things to see, a lot of things to contemplate. I understand why it was your favorite. So,
entirely the fight scene, and also Jack wrestling with his asexuality, which definitely doesn't reflect exactly how I felt when I was 17.
Perfect. So, I kind of want to listen to the next chapter, but I think
we've only been on 35 minutes, haven't we? Do you want another chapter?
Oh, we can, definitely. I want to go.
Okay. Right. So this one, basically, the action part is over now. They've this next one's at Spitfire's Rise. So you get to have a calm chapter for it. Well, okay, not necessarily calm, but an at-home chapter. The at-home chapters aren't necessarily calm. Anyway, chapter 11. By the time Ewan reached Spitfire's Rise, it was breakfast time on May 18th. Less than 48 hours until Nicholas Grant's birthday, the anniversary of Takeover Day, the rise of the AME Shield, and the end of their chances of winning the war. Jack and Gracie followed him through the trapdoor and endured the silent journey through the tunnels to the armory. In my head, I'd hoped all 7 of us would return together, he thought. Oh, who am I kidding? The whole thing was a trap from the start. We were always going to end up separated. Even Raj's death wasn't that surprising when you think about it. Bloody tragic, but not surprising. When he opened the door into the armory, Thomas was sat next to the memorial wall. On most days, opening the door to Thomas was like coming home to an overexcited Labrador. But that morning, the boy had rose to his feet like a tired old man, the excitement gone from him. Does he already know about Raj? Or is this about something else? What happened on the operating table? We haven't even mentioned that yet. McCormick was having an operation, performed by a nurse with substandard tools. Thomas ambled up to Ewan and gave him a soft hug, followed by Jack and even Gracie in turn. You okay, Thomas? Asked Jack. The boy shrugged. Is McCormick alive? Ewan asked. He's okay, Thomas replied, offering no further details. Ewan glanced at the memorial wall and found the name of Raj Singh already chiselled beneath Charlie's. That may have explained Thomas's mood, but Ewan's patience was too low for uncertainties. He headed for the steps up to the house and was met on the ground floor by Mark and Simon on the living room sofas. Where's Kate? He asked. Don't worry, we all lived, replied Mark. She won't be leaving her room for a while, though. Muck. He didn't have time to finish the word, as the man had already heard his voice and walked in from the kitchen. Joseph McCormick was alive, well, and smiling. Ewan, he said with a wavy, uncharacteristically emotional voice. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you again. Me too, sir, Ewan gasped. No hugs, I'm afraid. My abdomen's been cauterized together by a soldering iron, so I'd rather not go squishing things around. Nonetheless, he finished, holding out one hand in a shaking position. It's good to have you home. Ewan shook McCormick's hand, but avoided the warm smile on his face. There were already too many troubled thoughts running through his mind, and the joy of seeing a surrogate grandfather smile would cause enough internal conflict for tears to flow. How's Lorraine? She needs time, McCormick answered, reaching into his pocket and drawing out a small plastic bag. Now, who wants to see something disgusting? Well, I've not slept since I saw Raj getting his spine blown out and his body land on the school car park in 1,000 pieces. But sure, impressed me. Ewan was trying so hard to hide his disgust at McCormick's actions, the risks the man had put himself through, and his plan to put himself at even more risk by joining the next strike team. But even when Ewan tried to mask his emotions, he was transparent. McCormick apologised for his clumsy language, with genuine regret in his voice, and held out the plastic bag. An ugly, whitish-reddish sack lay inside, about half the size of Ewan's thumb. The large cyst that had kept McCormick safe in Spitfire's rise was now outside of his body, like a leash that had been unclipped from an irresponsible dog. Clearly he didn't learn his lesson in September, Ewan thought. The cyst wasn't the only reason he struggled in New London the first time. Any damage to your stomach? Abdomen. Here it is. Jack, Gracie, and Thomas walked into the living room just as McCormick raised his shirt. Gracie slapped her hands over her face, the idea of a grown man's belly just too much for her. The mark wasn't quite as horrible as Ewan had predicted. It was certainly bigger, spread across more than half of his abdomen, but it made sense that the cut would have to be bigger than the cyst itself. The burn marks from the soldering iron had left a canyon of thickened red mess, skin that looked hard to the touch, like overdone beef. And how are you actually feeling? Asked Jack. Surprisingly good after a day in bed, McCormick answered. And I've got at least 12 hours more before I need to do any exercise. Crap, it's already the 18th. The New London mission starts tonight. Has Ewan told you about Alex? Asked Gracie. McCormick's puzzled face revealed his answer. New paragraph. Ewan stood in the armoury with his arms folded, his eyes forced on the door to the exit tunnel. The comms team had been faithful in duty, waiting for confirmation that all 6 soldiers were home before leaving their post. But Ewan suspected Alex had other reasons for delaying his journey. Everyone was in the armoury, watching the exit like Thomas had. Even Lorraine and Kate were halfway down the steps, not daring to miss the scene that would follow. Ewan watched Shannon as she arrived first through the tunnel door. She gazed at the crowd as she entered, looking concerned but unsurprised. Somehow, Ewan could read her feelings better than other people's. Her first reaction was to walk past him, her hand brushing deliberately along his fingers. It was a non-verbal, discreet way of saying, I'm happy you're safe. We'll talk later when we're alone. Shannon headed for Kate on the stairs and whispered something that included the words sorry and Raj. She offered Kate a hug, which she accepted. Alex wandered into the armoury, uniting all 11 surviving underdogs in the same room, and let out a huff towards the crowd. We need to talk, said McCormick. Fine, thanks. How was your morning? Sarcasm, thought Ewan. Predictable response. Now, Alex, McCormick said. All right, Alex began, removing his weapons and placing them back on the shelves as if to pretend the crowd weren't there. Number 1, I'm not a clone. Number 2, I have never been through a cloning machine or anything, so I can't help you much, really. But you were cloned, Alex, said Ewan, twice as loud as normal. With or without your permission, Nathaniel Pierce grew 3 copies of you, and probably 1,000 more. If you're not willing to talk about this, there's nothing to talk about, said Alex, dumping his knife onto its regular shelf and leaning against the wall unarmed. I've had a lot of time to think about this in comms, and the more I think about it, the less I have to offer you. Then you must have seen this question coming, came Mark's voice. Someone's got to ask, so might as well be me. How do we know you're not a clone yourself? Alex rolled his eyes and pointed to his lips. Words, duh. Ewan looked across the crowd as a reminder for him to keep his temper under control, for his own sake and for everyone else's. A day earlier, Alex's argument would have been good enough. That morning, an extra layer of paranoia got in the way. Jack spoke first. Do you really think Pierce is incapable of making a clone with functioning vocal cords? He asked. We've not seen one so far, spat Alex. He'll have his own reasons, Jack answered, stimming his fingers to help him concentrate. Probably to control his minions, but he must be able to make speaking clones. I'll ask again. Do you really think that Nathaniel Pierce can grow a clone with a complete digestive system, nervous system, circulatory system, and a full set of organs, and a brain that enables them to operate radios and basic computers, but somehow find vocal cords too tricky? Shannon, back me up here. Ewan turned around and saw Shannon jump in surprise at the foot of the stairs, almost like a deer in headlights. What? You know your dad better than the rest of us. I think Grant ordered Pierce to leave his clones mute so they'd always be inferior to real humans. What do you think, am I right? Shannon paused, as if the thought of reading a father's mind filled her with existential dread. Knowing her upbringing, Ewan thought, it probably does. Everything he ever did was about control. Maybe you're right. And if he truly wanted to give his clones the power of speech, to spy on his enemies or something, he'd be able to do that, right? She paused again. Yes, he would. And he could even remove the war and peace settings in their mind to make them act like regular people? Yes. Okay, said Jack. Then I propose a blood test. He pointed at Alex's face and made fierce eye contact. Ewan was impressed as his closed directness. It was as if the experience of killing clone versions of Alex had given Jack a newfound confidence around him. We take some of Alex's blood, Jack continued, and put it in a petri dish or something to see how quickly it ages. In 3 hours' time, we look at it and check if it started to turn to jelly. If it hasn't, we know he's telling the truth. There were nods of agreement all around the armory, including from Ewan, but no words. Nobody in the group had anything to add to Jack's logic, except for Alex. For the sake of fairness, he spat, how about all 10 of you go through the same thing? Okay, so Grant must have taken my DNA from somewhere. Most of us have been to New London. Even McCormick's been once before. And if they took it from me, they could have taken it from anyone who's been in the outer city and bled on the floor, or spat, or sneezed and picked their nose and wiped it on the wall. You're wrong, Alex, Ewan said. They didn't take it from your DNA. Not unless your DNA has a memory. Shannon, do you think clones can be made with attached memories? If Pierce scans the previous model's brain or something? Yes. Alex snorted and thumped an angry fist against the wall behind him. Ewan spoke again. What are the chances of those clones finding their way to Lemsford? He asked. What are the chances of all 3 of them being grown from your model? There's a 1 in a million chance of it all being coincidence, so the other 900,000 must be the chance of them remembering. You really do have learning difficulties, don't you? They can't get your memories from wiping your snot on the wall, Ewan replied, ignoring the blatant insult. At some point, your brain must have been scanned. It's time to stop lying. I'm not... Sorry, Ewan, McCormick interrupted, with a soft voice that silenced the seller. But we have to consider all possibilities. We don't know anything about Pierce's technology, so it's still possible for Alex to be the victim without being aware. Nonetheless, Jack's suggestion of a blood test is a good one. Alex, I'm sure you understand. I'll do it, said Ewan. His head pointed at the wooden door to the neighbouring house. In the farm next door, out of everyone's way. Mark, I'll need a second guy, and some rope, a chair, and a plate. Mark nodded and headed up the stairs. Ewan turned to McCormick and whispered to him with eyes of sympathies and sorrow. You know what this means, don't you? McCormick nodded, visibly saddened. Tell them, Ewan. Ewan turned to the crowd, hesitating before giving his command. The rest of you, he finished, pack up your things. If those clones remembered the way to Lemsford, they'll remember their way here. Take whatever food and weapons you can carry. When the strike team leaves tonight, you'll all be leaving here too. But no buts, Thomas. Tonight, we're leaving Spitfire's Rise. A solemn silence fell over the crowd. Moving house had been difficult enough in the old days, but his surviving friends were faced with the task of doing so with 1 day's notice and nothing more than 2 handfuls of belongings. Grow some guts, all of you, Ewan thought. We all did exactly the same thing on Takeover Day. Alex, he muttered with a hand on the wooden door. Come with me. Ewan took no pleasure in tying Alex to a chair, although a part of him felt like he should have done. Alex had served the Underdogs well over the past year, but if it weren't for the urgency of the situation, it would have been nice to see the overconfident show-off put in his place. Mark had sat himself down on the floorboards, poking his fingers through the soil and uprooting the occasional carrot. The farm will be useless in a matter of hours anyway. Alex, Ewan began, drawing out the hunting knife from its sheath. I hope you understand, but I won't be apologising for this. You never were good at basic manners. Ewan smirked. Alex wasn't wrong, to be fair. Before we do this, he said, bending over just slightly to look Alex in the face, I need you to be completely honest. And I mean completely honest. Put your pride behind you for the sake of all of us. Yeah, because I'm a compulsive liar. I mean it, mate. Don't try being defiant. You're talking to the pathological king of defiance here, so it's better not to compete. You couldn't have been cloned without knowing anything about it. Ewan, Alex growled like a jaded schoolteacher towards the end of a bitter career. For the last time, I'm not being defiant, I'm not being dishonest, I just literally do not know anything about how they could have cloned me. End of discussion. Well, let's not give up yet, said Ewan. He did his best to use McCormick's approach to disagreements, discussing them rather than arguing over them. It was difficult when emotions were high, especially with his PDA-inspired need for control kicking in, but it was still the best way into Alex's brain. One way or another, Alex continued, the cloning happened. Let's at least find out when it could have been. Alex closed his eyes. Perhaps he found it easier to be straightforward when he couldn't see the people he was accountable to. I've not been anywhere interesting in a year, he said, except New London. Last time I was there, we destroyed the clone factory. Well, you guys did. I saw the place, took a bullet to the shoulder, and spent the next 3 days in a bungalow. Either way, my clones must have been grown there before you blew the place up. And when did you see New London before that? The day Ben Christie died. Months ago. Okay, said Ewan, so it must have happened when... on the clone factory mission. When Charlie died. I almost let that sentence slip out. I was pretty crap, to be fair, said Alex with a bitter laugh. Didn't last an hour before getting shot. By the afternoon, I was wrapping my shoulder in someone's shirts, trying to stop the blood. Jordan couldn't help but offer a well-humoured smile. Alex never talked about his failures, so it was only polite to avoid rubbing them in when he did. The next 3 days were the most boring of my life, Alex continued. Well, they would have been if I hadn't spent them worrying about you guys. Flattery will get you nowhere, grunted Mark through a mouthful of carrot. No, I actually mean it, said Alex. That was the whole adventure for me, except for going upstairs with Kate, getting shot and going downstairs again. Kate was with him for the start of the day, and she never reported anything unusual. Then he was on his own, cornered in the clone factory's alpha control room with no witnesses. Alex, what happened once you were trapped in the control room? I got out and reached the bungalow. Take me step by step. How did it happen? I took a rifle from one of the dead clones, shot my way free, then got out and reached the bungalow. Ewan's eyes widened. He looked over to Mark, who had also noticed the vagueness in his answer. Step by step, Alex. Start from when he shot your way free. Alex opened his mouth and nothing came out. You got out from the control room and... Nothing. Alex? I don't remember. Bingo, said Mark. Ewan watched Alex's expression turn from puzzlement to fear to abject horror. It was a mood he had never seen in the man's face before. I mean, I literally have no memory, Alex continued, his eyes to the floor and his head shaking rapidly in disbelief. I escaped the control room and reached the bungalow. I don't remember anything that happened in between, but I don't even remember not remembering, you know. I didn't even realise there was a gap in my memory until right now. But it was like I've tried to avoid thinking about it, but not realised. More words came out of Alex's mouth, but none of them helped Ewan understand him any better. All he knew was that there was a blind spot in Alex's memory, during which Grant in his eyes could have effectively done anything with no witnesses. Ewan, said Mark, the sooner you take his blood, the sooner we can end the experiment and evacuate. The sooner you can get some sleep too. Ewan clawed his fingers into his head, reluctant to admit Mark was right. Drawing a knife over Alex's skin would have been unpleasant enough at the best of times, but somehow it was worse when the man was tied to a chair, vulnerable to the point of tears, and trying to imagine what the hell Nicholas Grant had done to him without him even remembering. Nonetheless, Ewan raised his knife. I'm sorry, Alex. You said you wouldn't apologise. Ewan picked up the plate at the side of the chair and leaned forwards towards Alex's cheek. Wait, the face? Seriously? You can't take blood from my arm or somewhere? You didn't tell him, Mark? Your show, not mine. Ewan took a deep breath. Less than a foot in front of him, the whole of Alex's restrained body twitched in fear. There could be thousands of your clones running around. The only way we'll feel safe is if we make you look different to the rest of them. You're scarring my face. We're protecting you. From us. Because we're scared too. Scared? Alex gasped. You have all your memories. No blank spaces where unknown bad stuff might have happened. You don't even know what scared means. Ewan grimaced and laid the hunting knife against Alex's right cheek. End of chapter 11.
All right.
How are we feeling?
Oh, I was feeling kind of different after chapter 10. Now I'm feeling even more different.
Okay then. Well, at least no one got shot in that chapter.
Yeah, that's true. It was a little less wild than it was in chapter 10.
Oh yeah, and
So
so I think this is the right place to end because the next chapter is a New London chapter with like Oliver Roth and all the others. So it's it's definitely a kind of rest and take a breath couple of chapters, even though from Alex's perspective it is a bit bloody frightening.
Yeah. So are we awaiting something more dramatic coming up in the next chapters or not? Are we? I know I shouldn't be asking this.
Ultimately, yes, because the plan right from the beginning is we go out to the test center, we come back, and then on the night before the anniversary of Takeover Day, we break in and try to destroy every single trace of AME. So, yeah, that's basically going to be the second half of the book. This book was always going to be about 2 missions, and it said that from about chapter 2 or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, McCormick's alive and well, and he's recovered enough to be part of that strike team. And other than Raj, everyone else ended up fine. And the main mystery is what the hell happened to Alex? How did he get cloned, and why on earth does he not even remember it?
Yeah. We can
What happened in book 1 during that time where we didn't see Alex? Sorry, what was that?
do we get a closure of that in chapter 11 or we don't?
That was chapter
Sorry,
11.
in chapter 12. Sorry, chapter 12.
Nope, you don't. It's a New London chapter where Oliver Roth is just talking about things and stuff.
All right.
Although obviously I don't like leaving loose ends open. At some point between chapter 12 and the end of the book, you do get more information, and that is as much as I'm telling you.
All right. So, Aman is saying, what a journey. Yes, it has been a roller coaster ride so far, every single time. Like, so, yeah, totally. So, anybody has any questions, or we can call it a day. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining, and
Yeah,
I hope
thanks for having me
everybody
again.
enjoyed it. Interesting. All right. Take care, everybody. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye bye.